Sometimes we find ourselves haunted not by ghosts, but by people. A face, a voice, or a moment keeps replaying in our minds no matter how much time has passed. It could be someone we once loved, someone who hurt us, or even someone we barely know. This persistence isn't just emotional, it's psychological. Carl Jung believed that such obsessions often point not to the person themselves, but to something unresolved within us. Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." When someone is always on your mind, it may feel like destiny or obsession, but it's often the unconscious speaking in symbols and emotions. That person may represent a part of yourself you haven't yet acknowledged, your unmet desires, repressed wounds, or hidden fears. For example, if you're constantly thinking about an ex who betrayed you, Jung would suggest it's not just them you're fixated on, but what their betrayal triggered within you. Perhaps your fear of abandonment, your unworthiness, or a pattern you learned in childhood. The mind replays these connections in an attempt to resolve them. It's your psyche calling you to deeper integration. Comment shadow work if you're ready to face what's hidden. In Jungian terms, what we suppress doesn't simply disappear, it lives in what he called the shadow. The shadow is the collection of parts of ourselves we reject or are unaware of. Anger, vulnerability, shame, or even our strength. Sometimes the person on your mind is a mirror for your shadow. You might admire their confidence because you deny your own, or perhaps their cruelty reminds you of how harshly you speak to yourself. Jung teaches us that the psyche uses others to reflect the work we must do within. What irritates or attracts us is rarely random, it's meaningful. That person becomes a symbolic figure in your internal drama. They are not just a character in your past. They are an invitation to deeper self-acknowledge. As Jung once said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Think of that one person who lingers in your mind. Now ask, what do they represent emotionally? Do they make you feel seen, rejected, triggered, or inspired? Your answer holds the key to what part of your psyche is crying out to be acknowledged. For instance, if you can't stop thinking about someone who dismissed your feelings, you may be struggling with a part of yourself that feels voiceless. The mind loops not because it wants suffering, but because it seeks resolution. That resolution comes when we ask the difficult questions, what did this person awaken in me, and why am I still carrying that energy? Often, the people who live rent-free in our minds are tied to what Jung called complexes, emotional patterns formed from early experiences. These complexes are like emotional magnets, pulling in similar experiences and people again and again until we become conscious of them. For example, someone who grew up with emotionally unavailable parents might be inexplicably drawn to partners who do the same. The mind fixates on these people not out of affection but familiarity. Your psyche may be trying to solve the original wound through them, but as Jung would say, healing doesn't come from repeating the cycle, it comes from illuminating the pattern. Becoming aware of the complex loosens its grip, allowing you to relate rather than repeat. Jung emphasized the importance of individuation, the lifelong process of becoming who you truly are. This process often begins with emotional disturbances. That one person you can't stop thinking about might be the crack in your current identity, a signal that your inner world is ready to expand. Perhaps you've been living from the persona, the mask you wear in society, and this person confronts you with what lies beneath. Whether they awakened your deepest joy or your darkest pain, they've stirred something that matters. Jung saw such moments not as interruptions, but initiations. To be fixated on someone is to stand on the edge of a greater truth. If you dare to explore it, that person's presence in your mind could lead you back to yourself. Let us know in the comments what part of yourself you're beginning to understand. When someone won't leave your thoughts, it's easy to assume it's because of love, regret, or longing, but Jung would ask us to look deeper, to understand not just the emotion but the inner symbol. In his own words, your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. That person on your mind may not be who your heart is truly seeking. Instead, they could be a dream projected outward, a symbol your unconscious uses to awaken you. We often fixate on others when we're disconnected from ourselves. The psyche, in its wisdom, uses emotional obsession as a tool to lead us back to our inner world. Jung's theory of projection is vital here. When we project, we unconsciously assign parts of ourselves onto others, both the parts we desire and the parts we deny. This is especially common in relationships. Have you ever fallen deeply for someone you barely knew? That intensity is often projection at work. You may be seeing not the person as they are, but the ideal or shadow within yourself that you've externalized onto them. This also applies to fixation. When someone constantly enters your thoughts, ask, what am I projecting onto them? Do they represent freedom, power, rejection? Projection turns others into screens for our inner cinema, and until we reclaim those parts, the mind will keep playing the same movie. Let's consider an example. Imagine someone who can't stop thinking about a former partner who made them feel alive, but also unsafe. The mind clings to the memory not because it wants more pain, but because it craves resolution. In Jungian terms, that partner may symbolize the conflict between eros and logos, emotion and reason. Perhaps the individual is torn between their deep longing for passion and their fear of instability. The partner becomes an emotional cipher. The more unresolved the internal tension, the more the figure persists. Jung might say that the partner represents an archetype, maybe the anima or animus, the inner feminine or masculine energy that is asking to be integrated consciously, not chased externally. Jung believed that emotional pain is sacred. It invites us to transform. The heartache we feel, the thoughts we can't escape, are not punishments, they are invitations. There is no coming to consciousness without pain, Jung wrote. The person on your mind may be there because their presence, or even their absence, pushes you to confront what you've been avoiding. Perhaps their silence forces you to hear your own voice. Perhaps their presence challenges your sense of self. In Jung's view, every emotional disturbance is a psychic message. Ignoring it only deepens the wound, but exploring it leads to healing. The obsession is not the problem, it is the path. When the same face continues to appear in your dreams or thoughts, you might be experiencing what Jung called synchronicity, a meaningful coincidence that reflects something within. This isn't mere fantasy. It's the psyche mirroring itself in the world around you. Have you ever heard their name at random, seen a reminder of them in a dream, or felt their energy in silence? Jung would say these are symbols guiding you inward. Maybe you're being nudged to forgive, to let go, or to rediscover a lost part of yourself. That person is not the lesson. They are the symbol of it. What's calling isn't them, it's you, waking up to the parts you've buried. So when someone won't leave your mind, pause and ask, not why won't they leave me alone, but what part of me have they awakened? Jung's entire philosophy leads us toward individuation, toward becoming whole. And to become whole, we must meet all our parts, the joyful and the grieving, the strong and the wounded. That person on your mind is not just a person. They are a psychic doorway. You are not broken for thinking of them. You are being asked to enter the sacred terrain of the self and listen to what's been silenced for too long. Carl Jung once said, loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you. When someone is always on your mind, it might not be because of them, but because of a part of yourself that longs to be seen, heard, and understood. You may feel emotionally entangled with someone, yet the true yearning is for your own truth to be met. Often the people we obsess over are the ones with whom we felt glimpses of being fully known or deeply unseen, and that contrast can be emotionally overwhelming. The mind circles back to those moments not because it enjoys suffering, but because it aches for resolution, for communication, for wholeness. It's not just the other person you want to reach. It's the unreachable part of yourself that you handed over to them. In Jungian psychology, this is deeply tied to the concept of the inner child. The inner child carries not only our innocence and wonder, but also the wounds and unmet needs of our early years. When someone triggers us or consumes our thoughts, they often stir this child within us. Maybe they made you feel abandoned, like you once felt as a child, or maybe they made you feel safe and alive in a way you hadn't in years, and now, without them, the absence feels unbearable. But as Jung reminds us, we don't become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. That person may have cracked open your emotional defenses, and now, The mind is trying to heal what was once hidden. Consider someone who keeps replaying a short-lived but intense connection. Maybe it lasted only a few weeks, yet it left a permanent imprint. Jung would point out that intensity is often not about time, but about archetypal energy. Perhaps that person carried the energy of the savior, someone who showed up at your lowest and offered light. Or maybe they embodied the trickster, disrupting your order and exposing your illusions. These archetypes live in the collective unconscious, shaping how we perceive and engage with others. When someone holds that archetypal energy for us, it's no wonder we can't stop thinking about them. But the real work isn't about clinging to their memory, it's about exploring what they awakened within you and why. In dreams, recurring figures often represent disowned parts of the self. That person you keep seeing in your dreams or thinking about during the day could be a messenger from your unconscious. Jung often encouraged people to keep a dream journal, not just to interpret symbols, but to build a bridge between the waking and unconscious mind. Maybe the person you're thinking about shows up in dreams as a friend, a lover, or even a pursuer. Their presence may symbolize a quality you need to reclaim. For example, if you dream of someone who always made you feel rejected, perhaps your unconscious is showing you the part of you that still rejects yourself. Jung believed these inner dramas were never meaningless. They are calls for integration, for unity between the fragmented parts of our being. Have you ever had a dream that felt like a message? Shared below. Jung's teaching on wholeness is not about perfection. It's about embracing every part of your humanity. The person on your mind may represent a part of you you're still trying to deny. Maybe their confidence mirrors your own unclaimed power, or their coldness reflects your unprocessed pain. The psyche doesn't fixate for no reason. It fixates to survive, to evolve, to find coherence in the chaos. You are being shown something through this connection, even if that connection is one-sided or long gone. The emotional grip is there because meaning is still buried beneath it. And as you begin to unearth that meaning, you also begin to free yourself, not from them, but from the illusion that they were the source of your wholeness. As you continue this inner inquiry, remember, the obsession may fade, but the truth it pointed to will remain. Jung said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, and often, that becoming starts with what seems like a breakdown, an emotional loop, a fixation, an unanswered question. Don't rush to escape it. Sit with it. Let the presence of that person guide you inward, not outward. You are not weak for remembering. You are courageous for listening. And slowly, gently, the mind will release its grip, not because the person no longer matters, but because you've retrieved what they came to awaken. As we continue deeper into Jung's wisdom, one quote rises with quiet power. What you resist persists. The more we try to push someone out of our thoughts, the more tightly they cling to our awareness. This is not a flaw of memory, it's a function of the psyche. Resistance creates tension, and in that tension the unresolved finds fertile ground to grow. Jung believed that anything we avoid holds power over us, not because it's inherently strong, but because we've refused to meet it with consciousness. When someone is always on your mind, there's a message in their lingering presence. Perhaps they embody a wound you've never fully acknowledged or a longing you've tried to forget. In either case, the key is not in silencing the mind, but in listening to what it's really asking for. There's a pattern in emotional attachments Jung often spoke of. The way certain people can seem to carry our soul. These connections aren't logical. They bypass thought and strike straight through the heart. Sometimes we call them soulmates, other times karmic ties. But Jung would ask us to consider, is this person truly your soul's other half? Or are they holding the projections of your unlived life? Maybe you loved their passion because you've stifled your own. Maybe you feared their chaos because it echoed your suppressed wildness. The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. Jung reminds us that deep connections are not here to comfort us, they are here to transform us. Consider someone whose presence made you feel fully alive, then suddenly disappeared. The intensity of their memory lingers not just because of the bond, but because of what it activated. Maybe you felt creative again, brave again, hopeful again. But what if they weren't the source of that awakening? What if they were the trigger? Jung taught that many of our most transformative emotions lie dormant until someone comes along and touches them. But that doesn't mean they belong to that person. It means those feelings are yours to reclaim. The thoughts replay not to torment but to remind. You don't miss them as much as you miss the part of yourself that came alive in their presence, and that part is still within you. The repetition of someone in your mind may also be a call to integrate an unlived life. Jung spoke often about the tragedy of the unlived self, the paths we did not take, the voices we did not express. Sometimes a person haunts our thoughts not because of who they were, but because of who we became around them. Perhaps they were the only one who saw through your mask, or perhaps you wore your most beautiful mask for them, and now you can't take it off. Jung would say, integration begins where illusion ends. The more honest you are about what this person symbolized, the freer you become. Their memory is not a prison, it's a portal. Jung's concept of active imagination offers us a powerful tool. Instead of trying to suppress thoughts of this person, imagine having a dialogue with them, not for closure in the external world, but to understand what their image is trying to tell you. Sit quietly, let the memory come, let the conversation unfold. What would you say? What might they respond? This exercise bridges the conscious and unconscious mind and often reveals you may discover that what you really seek is not their return, but your own return to authenticity, to wholeness. That person becomes a character in your inner myth, not as a villain or savior, but as a guide. So if someone still lives in your thoughts, honor the weight of that. It means there's something your soul is still trying to teach you. Carl Jung never promised that healing would be quick or easy, but he did promise that every descent into the unconscious could lead to light. Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people. When you explore what this person mirrors in you, you take back your power. You stop waiting for them to give you something and start giving it to yourself. And in that return, the mind quiets. Not because you've forgotten, but because you've finally remembered who you are. Carl Jung once said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. When someone constantly reappears in your thoughts, it's easy to romanticize the connection or demonize it. But Jung would tell us, go deeper. This isn't about good or bad, right or wrong. It's about illumination. That person may carry a piece of your psychological shadow, the parts of yourself you've refused to acknowledge. Maybe their rejection made you feel worthless, or their affection made you feel special. Either way, they've become the stage upon which your inner drama plays out. They are not just a memory, they are a mirror. Think of a time when someone looked at you in a way that made you feel seen, truly seen, or a moment when someone's words shattered you because they confirmed what you feared most. Jung reminds us that the psyche doesn't separate reality from symbolism, the way the conscious mind does. That one person may symbolize an entire belief you've held since childhood. I'm unlovable. I'm not enough. I must earn affection. These beliefs take shape early and live in the unconscious as truths until someone triggers them. Then the emotional energy becomes magnetic. Your mind can't let them go because your soul can't let the old belief go. And the only way forward is through. Jung's concept of transference is key here. We unconsciously transfer old emotions, patterns, and expectations onto new people, often without realizing it. When someone is always on your mind, you might actually be relating to someone from your past through them. A father who was emotionally distant, a mother who criticized more than she comforted, a friend who abandoned you in silence. The current fixation may be a container for unresolved wounds. Jung would say the psyche is trying to heal what was never healed by reenacting the experience until we finally wake up. Once you recognize the pattern, the spell begins to break. The person doesn't vanish from your thoughts, but their grip softens. You stop confusing their presence with your pain. There's also the Jungian idea of soul retrieval. Sometimes during trauma or heartbreak, we leave pieces of ourselves behind. We disown our joy, our voice, our capacity to trust. And then someone comes along who awakens that lost part, and we feel whole again, but only temporarily. When they leave or change, it feels as if we've lost that piece again. But as Jung would remind us, the soul is not dependent on another. It only uses others to show us where we've abandoned ourselves. If you felt most alive with that person, ask yourself, what part of me came forward when I was with them? That is the part waiting to return. That is the part that's truly on your mind. Consider how many people carry grief not for who someone was, but for who they became around them. The permission to laugh, the courage to dream, the safety to cry. And now, in their absence, it's not just the person that's missed, it's the version of self that felt free. Jung would invite us not to cling to the image of the person, but to reclaim the parts of ourselves they awakened. That's the path to individuation, not merging with another, but retrieving the pieces of soul scattered across time and memory. So when your mind fixates again, don't push it away. Ask, what part of me is trying to return? In this process, patience is essential. Jung never rushed the soul. He knew that healing unfolds in layers. Each thought, each memory, each emotional surge a thread in the greater tapestry of self-discovery. The person on your mind may stay a while longer. That's okay. Their presence has purpose. And when that purpose is fulfilled, when your soul has retrieved what it came for, the fixation will dissolve, not in bitterness, but in gratitude, because they were never just a person. They were a symbol of your becoming. There's a moment in Jung's work where he reminds us we are not what happened to us, we are what we choose to become. This simple truth carries tremendous weight when someone lingers in our thoughts longer than we expected, longer than feels reasonable. It's not always because of a connection unresolved between two people. Sometimes it's the unresolved connection within the self. The fixation isn't about the past. It's about a future version of you that is struggling to be born. That person who keeps showing up in your mind may be carrying the very qualities, fears, or truths your soul is ready to face. They are not blocking your growth. They are signaling where it wants to happen. Think about how the psyche stores memories, not in straight lines, but in emotional landscapes. A certain smile, a scent, a sound. Suddenly, you're back there with them, even if there is years ago. Jung understood this deeply. He taught that time is not linear for the unconscious. That's why some people haunt us like it happened yesterday, even if decades have passed. The emotional charge remains until it's digested, until the psyche feels heard. So if someone feels present in your life, despite their absence, perhaps it's because your unconscious hasn't completed the emotional digestion. There's still something to feel, still something to forgive, or still something to reclaim. One of Jung's most powerful insights was this: the psyche is always seeking wholeness, not comfort, not logic, wholeness. And wholeness often requires facing pain, uncertainty, and the stories we've hidden from. If someone replays in your mind, especially during quiet moments, just before sleep, during meditation, or when you're alone, it's likely because your deeper self knows this is a moment of integration. The outer world falls silent so the inner voice can speak. Sometimes that voice takes the shape of a memory. Sometimes it takes the shape of a person. Jung would invite you to lean into that discomfort, to ask not why can't I let them go, but what part of myself is waiting to be claimed through this? Let's imagine a person constantly thinking about an old friend, someone who betrayed them. The betrayal cuts deep and yet the memory persists. Jung would ask, was it just the betrayal or the collapse of a belief? Maybe you believed you were finally safe, finally loved, finally chosen. And when that illusion shattered, the inner world cracked open. What now lingers in your thoughts isn't just the friend, it's the grief of the broken promise, the lost innocence, the need to rebuild your inner world without illusions. The friend becomes a symbol, a container for everything that now must be met with awareness and grown through with honesty. Jung's concept of individuation offers a compass through this process. The goal of life, according to Jung, isn't to eliminate suffering, it's to find meaning through it. The thoughts that loop are not signs of failure, they're part of your map. They lead you to the places where you left yourself behind. That person you can't stop thinking about might have been the doorway to your next becoming. You don't have to rush the letting go. You only need to stay curious. Why them? Why now? What is my psyche trying to say through their image? This kind of questioning is what Jung called conscious suffering. Pain that awakens rather than destroys. Let us know in the comments what part of your story you're finally ready to meet. with open eyes. Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." In many ways, becoming obsessed with someone else, thinking of them endlessly, replaying their words, reliving the connection, is the soul's disguised attempt to speak to itself. We think it's about them, but beneath that surface, it's our own depth calling out, aching to be seen, understood, and reclaimed. Sometimes it's easier to romanticize or resent another person than to ask, what do I actually feel? What have I truly lost? Because what's most often lost is not the person, but our access to a vital part of ourselves that felt alive in their presence. The one who loved without defense, the one who believed again. That version of you is what the fixation is truly about. Think of how we carry others in our nervous system, not just in memory but in energy. A person who once made you feel safe can still soothe or destabilize you with just a thought. A person who once made you feel unworthy can still trigger that ache even in their absence. Jung would call this psychic entanglement, and it often happens when boundaries were blurred or when we gave away a part of our essence. That person becomes a vessel for unprocessed emotion. We hold on not because we want to, but because something inside us still feels incomplete. The mind keeps circling, not to torture you, but to resolve something. And healing begins when we stop trying to forget and instead begin to listen. There's also the presence of archetypes at play. Jung believed that certain people activate archetypal roles within us: the lover, the mother, the rebel, the wounded healer. When these are triggered, especially for the first time, the emotions can feel overwhelming. You may feel like you need that person, but what you're really experiencing is the power of the archetype they've awakened. Maybe they made you feel like a nurturer, and now, in their absence, you question your worth. Or perhaps they ignited the part of you that yearned for wildness and expression, and now you feel dull without them. The truth is, those qualities were always within you. Jung would say, they simply showed you where the treasure was buried. There's a kind of sacred grief that comes with this awareness. It's not just sadness. It's the mourning of how much power we gave away to someone else, how many parts of ourselves we outsourced. And it's humbling to realize that much of the emotional weight we feel may have less to do with love and more to do with abandonment of the self. As Jung reminds us, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely, because to do so means admitting how deeply we've tied our self-worth to others. It means facing the emptiness we tried to fill with their presence. And yet, in that space of raw honesty, something sacred begins to emerge: self-compassion, self-trust, self-return. The final layers of fixation often reveal the deepest truths. You may realize that the person you couldn't forget never really saw the real you, or maybe they did and that scared you. Sometimes we are haunted not by the loss of love, but by the loss of illusion. We thought we needed them to feel whole. We thought they were the answer, but Jung gently turns us inward, reminding us that the soul never misplaces its gold. The treasure you seek is in the cave you fear to enter. That cave might be grief, it might be truth, it might be the silence you've been avoiding, but inside it, there's something waiting to be born. So if their memory still visits you, let it come, let it speak, not to drag you backward, but to carry you forward, into yourself. They were never the destination, they were the signpost, and now you're finally ready to walk the path. Carl Jung reminds us, the shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality, for no one can become conscious of the shadow without considerable moral effort. And now, after walking through the depths of memory, longing, projection, and the quiet aching of the soul, you stand at the edge of that shadow. The person who has lived so vividly in your thoughts wasn't just a person, they were the form your psyche gave to something deeper: your forgotten needs, your unhealed wounds, your unlived life. And now that you've met them, not just in memory, but in meaning, you can begin the real work, not of forgetting, but of reintegration, not of pushing away the pain, but of holding it tenderly until it softens into wisdom. Perhaps what hurts most isn't the absence of that person, but the presence of so much of yourself that you never knew how to hold. And that's what Jung's work truly teaches us. The people we can't stop thinking about are rarely just about them. They are bridges, fragile, powerful, and sacred, between our conscious life and our unconscious longing. Through them, the soul whispers what we are now ready to remember. Maybe it's the part of you that wants to feel worthy without needing to be chosen, or the part of you that is ready to be whole even if someone never returns. As Jung wrote, wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of the contraries. You are not broken for remembering, you are whole for being willing to feel. Let's go back one final time to the moment you realized you couldn't stop thinking about them. What were you really searching for in that repetition? Was it love, or safety, validation, or identity? Were you longing to be seen, or were you yearning to see yourself? Jung would say that such reflection isn't weakness, it's the very heart of individuation. The more conscious you become of what that person represented, the more freedom you gain. And with that freedom comes clarity. Not necessarily about the past, but about the present. You begin to see not what they meant to you, but what you now mean to yourself. Maybe now, when their image arises, it feels different. Less like a wound and more like a symbol. Less like a craving and more like a reminder. You survived. You learned. You reclaimed something essential. Jung believed that every psychological struggle is also a spiritual initiation. You've gone through a kind of inner alchemy, the transformation of emotion into insight, fixation into integration. This is not the end of your journey, but it is a turning point, one in which the person who once consumed your thoughts becomes a guidepost instead of a ghost. You no longer seek to possess them. You seek to become the version of you they helped reveal. So now, take a breath. Feel the quiet space they once filled, now softened by understanding. Thank them, not with words, but with the choice to carry forward what you've learned. As Jung reminds us, you are what you do, not what you say you'll do. The invitation now is to act, not in haste, but in honesty. Begin your shadow work, journal your dreams, ask the hard questions, and let your own reflection finally become more compelling than their memory. But this is where healing begins, not in forgetting, but in remembering who you were before you gave your power away. Comment the day you're beginning this journey of self-discovery, and come back in a few weeks to let us know how far you've come. Your growth matters, not just to you, but to those you may inspire by sharing it. Because someone out there is waiting to hear your story, just as you needed to hear this one.